Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. How have you been holding up lately? Feeling a little worn out by life? If so, take a deep breath and settle in, because today I've got a story that might just wrap around your heart like a warm blanket. It's the story of a woman who thought she'd lost everything: her career, her trust, and her belief in love. But in a quiet little town nestled in the heart of Kentucky, inside an old house waiting to be brought back to life, she discovered something she never expected: a heart still capable of feeling, still brave enough to try again. And the man who helped her see it? A billionaire who walked away from the spotlight to live simply, building not just furniture, but hope. Are you ready? Because what comes next isn't just a story. It's a journey of healing, second chances, and the kind of love that sneaks up when you least expect it. Isabel Grant used to have it all: a sleek Manhattan apartment, the title of creative director at one of New York's top interior design firms, and by her side, Ethan Blake. Talented, charming, seemingly the perfect partner in both work and life. They created iconic spaces together. Ethan often told her no one had an eye quite like hers, and Isabel believed him enough to share every draft, every evolving concept, until the day she found out they were no longer hers. At a high-stakes presentation, Ethan unveiled a design Isabel had spent months perfecting. No credit, no hesitation, just clean theft, dressed up as confidence. He didn't just steal her project, he stole her faith, her voice, and the version of love she had once dreamed of. Within days, whispers spread across the industry. Isabel got replaced. Ethan's the real talent. She didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't fight. Instead, she shut the door to her apartment, canceled every meeting, and on a gray afternoon she booked a one-way flight to Kentucky, not to run away, but to disappear. Willow Creek was the kind of town you could miss if you blinked while driving through. But for Isabel Grant, it felt like another universe. Quiet, unhurried, and best of all, no one knew her name. The project she'd accepted was to restore a long-abandoned Victorian house that once served as the town's community center. Peeling paint, a sagging roof, wild vines curling up the porch rail. Exactly the kind of place a Manhattan designer would scoff at. But Isabel wasn't looking for perfection, she just wanted somewhere to begin again. That's when she met him, Caleb Whitmore, a man in worn flannel with hands calloused from years of woodworking and eyes that held more history than words ever could. She'd later learn he was heir to a vast construction empire, one he'd walked away from to live here in Kentucky, building furniture by hand and quietly fixing things others had given up on. "Who are you?" Isabel had asked him once, half joking. Caleb had simply smiled and tapped the freshly installed railing. Just a man who likes fixing broken things. She didn't know then, he wasn't just talking about the house. Isabel came to Willow Creek with a list of rules. No getting close, no sharing, and absolutely no letting her heart wander again. But this town, with its gentle mornings and people who looked you in the eye, was starting to chip away at the walls she'd built. And Caleb, he was the first crack. He didn't speak much, but everything he did spoke volumes. He taught the local kids how to measure and saw, how to turn scrap wood into something useful. He wasn't just rebuilding a house, he was teaching others how to rebuild themselves. One afternoon, Isabel found herself watching through the window as Caleb guided a boy's hands over a piece of oak. "The wood will tell you what it needs," he said softly. The boy frowned, then nodded slowly as the grain began to speak. And Isabel, she began to listen too. She was changing. She started adding flower beds for Mr. Rowley, who loved gardening. She adjusted window placements so Mrs. Chen's Tai Chi class would get just the right morning light. She found meaning in the little things, in baking with Rosie, the spirited project organizer who treated her like family, in the laughter of children running through the hallways, and most of all, in the way Caleb looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. The house was coming back to life. But what Isabel hadn't expected was that she was too. The storm rolled in on a July night, sudden, fierce, and wild, like all the things in life we never see coming. Isabel had been working late in the back room when the wind started howling through the old frames, and the rain came down in angry sheets, pounding the roof like the sky itself was trying to wash everything clean. She ran out, heart pounding. Parts of the house still needed reinforcement. If the storm hit them just right, they wouldn't survive. When she reached the site, she saw headlights cutting through the dark. Caleb's truck. He was already there, hauling restored beams to shelter. "What are you doing here?" she shouted through the wind. "Great question, but first..." "Duck," he yelled back, grabbing her arm and pulling her just as a piece of the porch roof came crashing down where she'd stood seconds ago. Her heart stopped. They stumbled into each other, soaked to the bone, breaths ragged from fear and adrenaline. Caleb's arms wrapped around her, steady, strong, trembling slightly, but warm, anchoring. And in that moment, surrounded by chaos, Isabel whispered what she hadn't dared admit. "I don't want to lose you." She didn't know who leaned in first, only that the kiss exploded between them like lightning, raw, real, and absolutely necessary. It wasn't perfect, but it was true, rain-soaked, messy, and full of everything they hadn't said. Sometimes it takes a storm, not just of wind, but of the heart, to finally see what truly matters. 3 days after the storm, an email from Ethan Blake landed in Isabel's inbox. Subject: "We could start over." In it, he confessed the project he'd stolen from her was falling apart. Investors wanted to revert to the original design, hers. He invited her back to New York, offering full credit, a generous consulting fee, and even dangled the idea of rekindling what we had. So Isabel drove to Nashville to meet him, not because she was tempted, but because she needed closure. Ethan was the same: tailored suit, practiced charm, eyes that almost looked sincere. But this time, Isabel saw the hollowness behind that smile. "You don't want me," she said, calm and steady. "You want what I can give you." She pulled her hand back from the table and stood. "And I want a life where trust isn't the price of success." When she walked out of the restaurant, she felt lighter than she had in years. And when she saw the unread text from Caleb, "Need to go over the west window design with you," she didn't just smile. She turned her car back toward Willow Creek. Because this time, she knew exactly where she belonged. The community center's grand opening unfolded on a soft autumn afternoon. Golden Kentucky sunlight bathed the porch as the people of Willow Creek gathered, bringing food, laughter, and the stories they'd built together with every nail and brushstroke. Isabel stood on the porch, watching them step through a doorway she once thought was just a project. Now it stood as proof of healing, inside and out. Caleb joined her, sliding his hand into hers. He looked devastatingly handsome in a crisp blue shirt and those worn boots she'd come to love. "I've got something for you," he murmured, pulling a small wooden box from his pocket. "It's not a ring, at least not yet." He opened it, revealing a hand-carved pendant, magnolia blossoms entwined in an infinity symbol. "I'm not rushing," he said, "but I'm serious. I want to build a life with you, Isabel, one day, one piece at a time." She couldn't speak. Tears welled up, but her smile said everything. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Caleb smiled and dropped to one knee beneath the golden sky. "More sure than any home I've ever crafted, because with you, I'm finally home too." Then, yes. And for the first time in her life, Isabel didn't need to run. She was home. Their wedding took place beneath the magnolia trees, right in front of the community center they had built together. The sky was a clear Kentucky blue, and sunlight spilled across rows of wooden benches draped in soft lace. The entire town of Willow Creek had shown up. Rosie clutched her husband's hand in the front row, Lily scattered petals with joyful abandon, and Mr. Chen led a small band strumming a gentle tune on his old guitar. Isabel wore a simple white dress, her hair loosely curled and tucked with a magnolia bloom. She walked slowly toward Caleb, the man who waited with steady eyes and a heart full of peace. He wasn't in a fancy tuxedo, just a white shirt and an earth-toned vest. Simple, honest, just like him. "I've built many houses in my life," Caleb whispered as she reached him, "but today, I get to build a home with you." They exchanged vows, short, raw, and true. Not a performance, just a promise between two people who had broken before and were brave enough to love again. Applause filled the air, and when Caleb kissed his bride, Isabel knew this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something far more beautiful. Winter arrived softly in Willow Creek, like a whispered lullaby. Isabel woke to the scent of pine and the glow of morning light filtering through snow-covered windows. Their little cabin, Caleb's gift after the wedding, was warm, quiet, and theirs. "Older than usual this year," Caleb said, wrapping her scarf before heading out to chop wood. "Then we need more hot chocolate," she smiled. The days that followed were slow and sweet. Together, they decorated their home with handmade touches. Real pine wreaths, strings of warm yellow lights Caleb wired himself, and a tall tree in the center of the living room. Isabel hung little wooden ornaments, hearts, stars, and carved pieces that read hope. Rosie hosted a winter movie night at the community center. Children piled onto blankets, sipping cocoa while watching cartoons. Isabel handed out gingerbread cookies, while Caleb sat in a corner, quietly strumming his guitar. The kids kept shouting requests. "Play that snow song, Uncle Caleb." That night, back home under soft lamplight, Caleb pulled a small wrapped box from his jacket. Inside was a hand-carved wooden frame. Their wedding photo sat inside. "We built something," he said, voice low. "Not just a house," she whispered, leaning on his shoulder. "A life." Outside, the first snow continued to fall. But inside that little wooden cabin, everything was warm. Spring arrived in Willow Creek with blooming magnolia trees and soft green fields that danced in the breeze. The town felt alive, almost celebratory, though only Isabel knew why her heart beat with a secret joy. She stood in the garden by the front porch, gently placing a hand over her belly. Just weeks ago, she had discovered a quiet miracle growing inside her, a new beginning tucked beneath her ribs. She didn't tell Caleb right away. Instead, she waited for a quiet morning, the kind only Willow Creek could offer, where time moved slower and the world whispered instead of shouted. Caleb was reading on the porch swing, coffee in hand, his boots resting against the railing. "I have something for you," Isabel said softly, handing him a small envelope. Inside was a grainy ultrasound photo, along with a note scribbled in her handwriting. "Coming soon, your greatest build yet." Caleb stared at the image, then at her, and for the first time in a long time, he was completely still. "Are you serious?" he whispered. Isabel nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "Yes." He stood and wrapped her in his arms like she was the most fragile, precious thing in the world. Then, starting today, he murmured into her hair, "I'm learning how to be the best craftsman life ever saw, at being a dad." From that moment on, Caleb transformed. He bought every parenting and pregnancy book the local bookstore could order, reading them aloud every night while resting his hand over her belly. "You hear that?" he'd say to the bump. Chapter 3 is all about kicking habits, so go easy on your mom tonight. Every morning before leaving for work, he'd crouch down and kiss her belly. "Good morning, little one. Sleep well?" When Isabel struggled with morning sickness, Caleb tried a dozen ginger tea recipes, burned toast more times than he could count, and once drove 30 minutes just to get her a pickle and peanut butter sandwich because she said she wanted it in a dream. "You know what's harder than carrying a baby?" Isabel said one evening, groaning as she tried to find a comfortable position. "Let me guess," Caleb grinned, "living with a nervous first-time dad who reads too much?" She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. And Caleb, he just held her, patient as always. The night their baby arrived, the sky cracked open with a spring rainstorm. "Caleb," Isabel whispered through gritted teeth, gripping the bed sheets, "I think it's time." Panic. That was the only word to describe the man who once faced down hurricanes and power outages with calm precision. Caleb put his shirt on inside out, grabbed the hospital bag, forgot the car keys, then ran back in drenched. At the hospital, he never left her side. Through every wave of pain, every contraction, he held her hand, kissed her forehead, whispered, You're doing amazing," like a mantra. And then a cry. Not Isabel's, not his, but a small, perfect wail that cut through the chaos. A nurse handed him a bundle wrapped in white, a baby girl with downy dark hair and fingers barely the size of his thumb. Caleb looked at her, and then he cried. "Hi there," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm your dad. I've waited my whole life to meet you." From the bed, Isabel watched him, her husband, her daughter, her everything, and felt a warmth bloom in her chest so deep she wondered how her heart could even hold it all. They had built a house. They had built a life. And now they had built a family. 5 years later, it was a quiet spring evening. Caleb and Isabel sat side by side on the porch of their wooden cabin, warm tea in their hands, the scent of fresh magnolia in the air. The old swing creaked gently under their weight. The house had new windows now, a reading nook filled with scribbled drawings, scattered crayons, and stacks of children's books. Out on the grass, their 5-year-old daughter raced barefoot, laughter bubbling up like music. A big, fluffy white dog, Murphy, her 3rd birthday gift, bounded beside her. "She's getting so big," Isabel said, watching the curls bounce at the nape of their daughter's neck. "She's got your fire," Caleb replied, "but your gentleness too." "No." Isabel shook her head, smiling. "She's got your heart, steady, kind, and always believing in second chances." Caleb reached over, took her hand. "You once believed you'd lost everything," he whispered. "But you ended up giving me the only thing that ever truly mattered, a reason to come home." Isabel leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you helped me rebuild, piece by piece, until I remembered how to feel again." On the lawn, their daughter spun in circles, arms out, joy radiating like sunshine. Murphy barked happily, chasing butterflies. Inside the home they'd made, laughter lived in the walls. And on the porch, Isabel and Caleb sat in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because their hearts were already full. Forever didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it sounded like a giggle in the grass, a paw thumping the porch, or a whispered good morning to a growing belly. They had found their forever. And it was beautiful. Sometimes forever doesn't look like fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet laughter, warm hands, and the way someone says your name like it's home.